Good evening. Welcome to this edition of Bible Topics. It's great to have you join us once again on the program. Tonight we're going to be talking about a very important topic, a topic that is the subject of all sorts of debate, news articles, writing various different opinions and perspectives, even in Christian media. That is the topic of biblical masculinity. I'm joined by a special guest this evening, Ayo Oduniyi from 412 Men. Great to have you on the show, Ayo.
Thank you so much, Regan, for having me, man. Enjoying today.
So tell me a little bit about your ministry, 412 Men.
Yes, so 412 Men is in its 6th year. I started it in 2017, just before I got married. And my motive behind it was just to build a space for where men can come together, discuss manhood and discuss being a Christian man as well in the 21st century. So in that time I had been doing a lot of mentoring, discipling, and this came into a consistent theme amongst young men and peer age as well of what we're going through. And I realized that, you know what, some of these stuff that I need to kind of speak to could be spoken well in a wider context of other men being involved in that as well. So we started in prep. And we've been going 6 years strong so far. And just the name 412 Men is based on 1 Timothy 4 verse 12, which speaks about when Paul was charging Timothy to let no one despise you because of your youth, but be an example in conduct, in faith, in love, in purity, and so forth. So my goal at 412 Men is for a space for men to discuss, to be vulnerable, transparent, but also to grow in their manhood so that we can become a model of biblical manhood to other younger men. So we have a charge, a vision that each one will disciple 12 people before they die, and those 12 people will disciple 12 people, and so forth. We should be able to trace back our discipleship over 4 generations. So
Multiplication.
Multiplication, yeah. So our goal is very future orientated. I believe the change I want to see starts with us. So if we can get it right, we become a model for the next generation and so forth.
Praise God, and that starts here. That starts with you and me. Right. So it's wonderful. Now, it seems saw that there was something lacking.
Yes.
Would you say there's a lack of understanding, discipleship, both in regard to men?
I think with men, I mean, in general, also being a pastor, you know, it's very hard to gather men anyway if it's not around football or sports or some sort of social activity. Sometimes I feel maybe the ego nature of man, that's the pride of man, kind of just makes us go into this island sort of mindset of just doing it our own way, so to speak. So I was noticing that there's a lot of women conferences, a lot of women ministry, a lot, and they love it. And for men, there's a lot more, what's the word, unique challenge. So I think there's a mixture between what I've seen, especially with these guys. I do feel that if we took the initiative, especially even the whole command for older men, teach younger men, I feel like the barrier that we see or the difficulty that we see would just disappear. And there's a lot more transparency from other men about what it means to be a man. I think a lot of us will not fall into the illusion that everyone's got it together and we're all trying to just be in this rat race or trying to prove ourselves. We realize, you know what, all of us are struggling in one sense or another, or all of us can relate in one sense or another, and that will allow us to be more motivated to actually come together and talk and fellowship and really discuss these areas. So it's a myriad of things, but I think that's at the crux of it, to be honest with you.
You've mentioned Timothy, you mentioned that particular passage there in 1 Timothy 4, and one of the things that stands out to me when I think of Timothy's life and his ministry, just from what Paul writes to him, it sounds like there were a lot of challenges he was up against in ministry. What are some of those challenges that perhaps you have come across most in your own life, in the lives of some of the guys you're mentoring?
Yeah, I mean, I think Timothy is a really powerful model because you realize that sometimes, like Timothy, you've been called at a young age. You may feel your lack of experience when it comes to age, but not lacking in maybe calling and gift, may be used against you. I feel like Timothy, intimidation is a very strong thing. Like Timothy, maybe you only have one male figure in your life, Paul, and your only reference points to your spiritual history is your mother and your grandmother. So I feel like, once again, I think the biggest impact has been the lack of sound relationship with other men that can really build affirmation in you just to be confident in who you are. There's a temptation to have that whole appearance of godliness but lacking the power thereof, where you really are a secure, affirmed individual who's not allowing what God has put on him to define him, but who he is as to God, his beloved son, which God will use other men who will be as models of fathers to really affirm that in you. So I feel like for myself, when I read the book of Corinthians and I see Paul challenging them about, you have many teachers but few fathers, I'm seeing that there's a pattern where the pattern that I see before me is more carnal than it is spiritual. So it's easier for me to model behaviors that only amplify my insecurities rather than modeling behavior that amplify me to be strong spiritually. So that's what I see in myself, and that's what I see in the guys. If anything I see in myself, I see it 10 times more worse than the guys. That's just it, we're all in the same boat. Actually, so yeah.
Okay, so you've touched on something that I wanted to ask about anyway, but if we can expand on it.
Yeah.
You mentioned that Timothy had seemingly only one major male role model in his life. Paul speaks to Timothy as his child, his son in the faith. He indicates that his spiritual input has primarily come from Lois and Eunice, his mother and grandmother. There is really an epidemic, I think we could call it that, of fatherlessness in our society. How impactful is that, and what are some of those pitfalls? What are some of those consequences that we see in the day-to-day life and in ministering to men who have essentially grown up with no father, or with a father who was in all but reality absent?
Yeah, I mean, what you see is a lack of identity. That's the crux of it. Lack of identity. In Proverbs you see it throughout. Fathers instruct, mothers teach. There's this duality, that parenthood of one man and one woman that gives to a child, and I feel like children are growing up with the lack of instruction and identity of, this is who you are. This is what you're called to do. I see it through the Bible where, let's go to the first father, Adam.
Let's do it.
Adam is a very interesting figure, because before Adam meets Eve, we see that Adam has a function called calling. He has to name each animal. God. So we're seeing that there's this thing about a man where he's been called to name, he's called to define. When he meets the woman, he said, "This is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. You shall be called woman." So we're seeing that even through that instant there, he's even given the woman Eve identity, even purpose, even been able to define who she is. We see it now. But what happens after the fall is that man becomes silent, because we see when they give birth to who was it first? Was it Seth or was it Abel?
Cain. Cain is Abel. Cain, and then Abel, and then Seth.
We see that it was the mother who named the child, not the father. And we know there's a pattern with fathers supposed to be naming the child. And we see a pattern in Genesis 5 where it talks about, and Adam begat in his own likeness, his own. So we see that there's a departure now.
It's a differentiation
from the pattern of God, which is where God made man in his image and likeness. And now Adam, I think it's Genesis 5 verses 4, it talks about, and Adam begot in his own likeness, his sons and daughters. I mean, so we're seeing that gradually over the beginning of time, there's been a departure from the functionality of man that has resulted in us not being able to cement identity into our children, especially men, which I then feel if you don't have a secure identity in that, you're more open to abuse the power that you do have as a man for own selfish gain. So, and I feel like that's what we're seeing. When you see fatherless homes, you're seeing a pattern of selfish men that are just going after what they want to do, or what they know is best to them, what to do, which is just to do what they want to do. So that's why I feel the crux of the matter is. And so the fatherlessness is just birthing men without identity, and men without identity are subject to manipulation, abuse, control, and doing things for selfish gain that hurts more people. So yeah.
Really helpful, Ayo. Genesis 1:27 speaks to that God created identity. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Right? And so we have this invested value that is given to us by our Creator God. He is the Father of mankind. He has given us our identity, our value, our purpose, and establishes our destiny as well. And it's before humanity, it's before Adam and Eve. Look, this is your responsibility. This is your role. I'm placing you in Eden. Any tree here you can eat the fruit of except this one tree. The day you eat of it, you will surely die. We begin to see some of this, this reality that humanity was created and was good. It was good identity. But some of this begins to be subverted through the deceptive process of the enemy, through the serpent. And we see the woman brings the fruit to Adam. He does not take responsibility. He does not act the man. He does not remind, as Eve knew, of the law that God had given. He takes it along with her and he eats it. He doesn't intervene even in the conversation with the serpent, even though it seems that he was there.
He was there, and that part's very key, guys. He was there. But he was passive. And I think it's the passivity of man is what we're seeing also happening in our day and age, where men are passive in areas where they need to be active. Our aggression is not being used in a way whereby for protection. It's being used once again for selfish reasons. So I feel like at the core of a lot of male issues and manhood masculinity is that men, are passive in where they need to be more active or aggressive. I would even say more aggressive. Like I feel there's an aggression and a might of a man that is, when used appropriately and in this godly manner, brings forth good fruit. But we're seeing bad fruit.
Very definitely bad fruit. There's no boldness. There's no sense of standing firm in the truth that God has given. A verse that I think is very important for men and also for women who are like Eunice and Lois there in Timothy's life, trying to encourage him. This is a verse that's extremely important. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. 1 Corinthians 16 verse 13. And this is in the context of, you already mentioned sort of the church at Corinth to a degree, and how there was such chaos and there was disorder, rank disorder, pride in sin. Just falling into, you think of this one dynamic and make it make sense where a man, it says, has his father's wife. Now, it seems that the father, the likely interpretation of that is that the father has died and the guy has married, it's not his mother, it's his father's wife. And I see it regularly. Like you just see pops up on the sidebar or on Google News or in the tabloids. They'll say, they post these stories and it's like, oh, this is remarkable. His dad fell in love with this person, 20 years younger, and now they're a couple. And it's like there's this celebrity element. The people in Corinth were proud of it. At the time, it said not even the rest of society is cool with this. Not even the pagans are all right with this stuff. But you're taking pride in this situation when you shouldn't. So in all of that, there's a lack of awareness of what God is, of who God is, of His holiness, of the fact that He's the one who establishes our identity. And there's a lack of awareness of who God's created us to be. Following on from identity, what are some issues that you see?
I mean, I think even that verse is really powerful, because obviously I think Paul lists out, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Then the next verse says, let all that you do be done in love. I feel like when flowing from identity, if we now, in which we do all believe that God is love, that's one of the core identity of who God is. I find it interesting that another verse in 1 Corinthians 13, Paul talks about, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I thought like a child. What else did he say? I reasoned like a child, but when I became a man,
I gave up childish ways.
Away childish things. That's in the same chapter where he spends extensive time talking about love. And I tell my men, we had a series on this. I said, you know what? For me, the highest expression of manhood is embodying that characteristic of love. And I find it interesting that Paul had to emphasize that as a last statement here when he was charging the men that let everything you do be done in love. And I feel like when John the Apostle talks about the war between God and the world, he speaks about anyone that loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. So we're seeing straight away that the main reason why men may chase after the lust and the pride of life is because they are absent of the love of the Father. And I feel like same thing identity, but still in the same vein, there's a lack of people knowing that they are loved by God, that now shapes their behavior that they do. We see it through Christ, who is our model. Before he does anything, God announces to the whole world that that's my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. And I feel like that beloved son identity, the children, men and women, knowing that they are loved, by our Heavenly Father and by, the parents that he has given us on this earth, will build, what's the word to use? A strong framework will become even a blueprint and a direction as to how to live out a life that reflects God in his beauty, in his righteousness and holiness and all that sort of stuff. So I feel like that part there is a very key element that is missing, and I feel like even when God charges parents on how to relate with their children, he tells the children, honor your mother, honor your father. The first come up with a promise. They may be well with you, may live long life. But he says, fathers, don't exasperate your children. Don't provoke them to anger. And I find that so interesting where, there's this responsibility on a man where he has to cultivate an atmosphere, build a culture around his home where his children don't feel exasperated, aren't necessarily provoked to anger, where maybe they're hearing dad say one thing but live an opposite thing. You know what I mean? There's a hypocrisy, there's this integrity that needs to be upheld in how children see their parents. Because once again, we're their role models. The Bible says, Ephesians 5 verse 1, imitate your father as still children. So we know that there's an imitation that we have that they will see that either will lead to them being exasperated and angry children or frustrated children, or children that are following the pattern and the lifestyle of our Heavenly Father as we ought to as well. So I feel like there's almost, if I'm honest with you, a higher responsibility on those of us who claim to be fathers to really pass down and put a teaching and a model for the younger men to follow. I feel like that's where the cure is. I feel like it would be wrong of us to place that responsibility solely on men who don't know what a man looks like, because the men that are around are not being like men. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Very important.
So I think that's really important. That's what I've seen. I realize all the more that the change I want to see starts in me. I have an influence. I have an opportunity to demonstrate something that's possible. And, we live in a very visual world. Sometimes we live in a world whereby, people don't believe it until they see it, you know what I mean, kind of thing. And I think we've been given that opportunity to embody, to become that incarnate image of Christ on the earth that reflects his glory, that allows people to see that this is real, this is possible, and this is something that I can attain to too.
So we've been talking a little bit about absent or passive masculinity, wherein there's just, it's like Adam, we're there kind of alongside, but we're not really active, we're not proactive, we're not taking leadership, we're not actually seeking to be who God has created us to be in, being the spiritual leaders of our home that our families need, and being the fathers our children need. There's often an extreme, so we often go from one extreme to the next. It's one of,
as humans do.
You know what it is? It's a tragedy of humanity. You know, where we can't very often get the balance right. We go from one extreme to the next, back again, and then hopefully somewhere along the line we find the balance at some point. But here we have an opportunity, and that's, guys, the point of Bible topics, really, to try to bring the scriptures in. Let's lay emotions aside. Let's lay hot takes aside. Let's just get into what the biblical model is concerning these topics that we address. But we have to be honest about the other extreme of passive and absent masculinity being toxic masculinity.
Okay, yes.
And I think it's something that it can be misattributed. It can be something that people will look at that and say, oh, that's toxic masculinity. And sometimes, actually, that's simply operating from another extreme. So you kind of have two secular, worldly, carnal ideologies that show different extremes of a human approach to who we are, male and female. You have feminism on one side, extreme feminism, and you have misogyny on the other. And one says the future is female, the other is like men are, we're the ones in charge, we're the ones in control. And there's elements of truth that you can find in both of these kind of warped realities and identities. But at some point, there does need to be an understanding. The Bible presents a strong picture of masculinity, but it's not the Andrew Tate model of masculinity. It's not this domineering, okay, we're going to be the boss of you, kind of abusive type form of masculinity. How does this play out practically? How does toxic masculinity play out in a practical way?
Good question. I think, once again, it plays out practically because you do have men, Andrew Tates and so forth, who have mass influence and who are maybe also, craftily, skillfully can put together a message that appeals and speaks to the brokenness of men, that kind of gives them a sense of, oh yeah, maybe I am supposed to be like this because that speaks to this area of me, or where I feel like this and whatnot. So we have to be honest that these men are speaking something that resonates, and we need to understand why is it resonating with these young men, and why is it appealing? Yes, of course we can do the quick, oh yeah, because of sin, or we can look at the lack of what needs to be done and what's being filled with that, which is his messages that are giving these young men some sort of sense of, once again, identity. That so because I've heard some of his stuff and I've seen how he mixes some stuff that I would probably say, okay, and then brings in, once again, an extremism of it where it's almost void of its true meaning of what it means to be a man. And I think, once again, like, when we look at Christ, there's this, like, he just topples culture on itself. He's the King of Kings, but says, I have not come to be served, but to serve. I've come to lay down my life for my friends. There's this thing of where he says, high is going low, and toxic my team will say, you only win when you're high, kind of thing. So toxic masculinity in its core thrives off the selfishness of man needing to feel like he is the one. And when men realize more so that toxic masculinity will make you end up feeling lonely, because you will use anybody for the expense of your own prosperity. And once again, it's that whole selfish gain ego, pride, so to speak, where we feel like we need to be someone at the expense of others rather than allowing who we are supposed to be for the betterment of others. So I feel like at its core, toxic masculinity completely devoid of servitude to men and to mankind in general.
One of the things that I think is important from what you've said is recognizing why there is this appeal, why there's this problem, why are influencers, for instance, who are kind of propagating a toxic view of masculinity popular. It's easy to just brush it aside and say, okay, well, we don't want to consider that. That's just misogynistic. Grappling with it is much more difficult, and recognizing, okay, there's something that the Bible does that we see the best models of manhood in the Bible do, that we see individuals who are living as strong, biblical, godly men today, how they have been treated as well. There's an approach that addresses men uniquely. There's not a kind of this sense of, okay, we're going to just merge everything together and everyone together. There's a recognition that men and women have differences. There's recognition of the biological, evidential differences that are there, yes, but there's also a recognition of our wiring, how we think differently. Our psyche is completely different. How we think, how we approach different things is often so different. So we need to approach men as men. You mentioned there's this plethora of women's conferences and events and prayer gatherings and stuff, and they love it. It's great. Men often, there's not as much in many cases for. Now we can go to the other pole of things, and in trying to reach more men, fail to reach women as well. But approaching men for who they are as men is important.
100%.
I'm speaking directly to men, speaking in a challenging way to men, addressing some of the big issues that are affecting men today, that have perhaps affected throughout history. One of the things we mentioned, Andrew Tate, his coaching of men presents this idea of helping men, empowering them to be better in all realms. It's a really attractive proposal. Do you want to be better in all realms? Do you want to excel? I mean, these are good things. That God did not make us to strive for mediocrity. He didn't make us to say, I just want to live my life wasting it. He didn't do that. So this is appealing and attractive, even in language, potentially to some Christian young men who are going to look and say, I want to be better. But they may not feel like they have that role model, and truly, they may not have that role model. And so there's a reality of saying, okay, we need to talk directly to men. We need to seek to help one another, to build one another up to be better in all realms. But that shouldn't produce this, I'm getting more for me, I'm gaining more for me. For a biblical sense of masculinity, it's not about me being the one. As you highlighted, that's the problem with toxic masculinity. It's about Christ being the one. What are some of the issues that we need to be speaking directly to men on?
I mean, if I'm honest, I used to try to write a list when it came to all of these things, and recently, if I'm really brutally honest, it really boils down to this identity area, where if we look at the issues we're seeing when we're seeing our young men, let's use our young men that are killing each other on the streets at the moment now. I've got a son. He's 9 months now. To fathom that he would have the motivation to even want to stab somebody, and him not gravitating the understanding of life, and to take somebody else's child's life, means there's something in him hasn't valued himself, where he's now able to kill his brother, because that's his brother, fellow mankind, and it goes back to the whole first two brothers, Cain and Abel, where there's this whole thing of, am I my brother's keeper? There's this loss of identity of you realizing that, hey, this person is your brother. It's one of you. You killing them is essentially killing you, one of yourselves, you know what I mean, kind of thing. And once again, you're only gonna, he did that because of what obviously he was jealous, he was envious, he did wrong and he probably did right and therefore he acted on those things. And once again, if he knew who he was, he wouldn't need to compare himself to his brother, and he probably would have done what is right and therefore been satisfied in that. So once again, I'm seeing that there's this eternal battle within of a lack of satisfaction of oneself as in who we are for who we are, that now spurs us on for the need to kill and to steal and to do other things, to once again allowing the external thing to define what should be eternal. So more times when I deal with issues with men, we are going to boil back down to identity. Yeah. We're going to boil back down to the lack of affirmation from fathers. We're going to boil back down to the lack of community. We're going to boil back down to just not having the necessary input, not being seen, not being validated, not being affirmed. All these things at the core foundation are the reason why a lot of things that we're seeing that are happening that are not good, that are evil, it's just people that are spiraling out of control from the inside out. So I'm on this mission where I want to affirm and teach men who they are, from that births values, from that births, genuine, sincere love, from that births integrity and so forth. So I find it hard to stray away from this being the core topic here, because in scripture I see it everywhere. The pattern is the same. It's father, son, like it's everywhere, literally. And I'm just like, once we try to cure it outside of that, we're missing the foundation, which then means that whatever we do build upon that, it's gonna fall. You know what I mean, kind of thing. So that's what I would say we need to speak to. When you know who you are, it's going to affect what you do, and what you do is going to affect the million lives that are attached to your actions with consequences. And if they're good things, good fruit. If they're bad things, bad fruit. So
absolutely,
yeah, that I can't lie. I was trying to think of there's not a long list. Which is the fruit of the tree. It all goes back. It all goes back to the root of the tree.
We can talk about a list of misgivings and stuff, but it ultimately all goes back to that core fundamental issue. We were made in the image of God. Mankind sinned against God. We fell, and with that comes a fracture. Okay, you're exactly right to highlight that. There seems to be a very stark differentiation between Adam and Eve. They're made in the image of God, but then from that point on, we see man giving birth in his own image. It's still, to a degree, it still has that investment of value from being made in the image of God, but it's that much less like God. In trying to be more like God, mankind became less like God. They were told, take of the fruit of the tree. This is good. This will make you more like God. They take the fruit of the tree and they become so much less like God. But we're increasingly, people speak of our society as a post-truth culture. And in that sort of environment, there's a lot of different ways that can be defined and looked at. But one of the things that really stands out is we've completely, it's almost normal to not have any faith, to not have any belief. Of any kind, even, like just the amount of conversations that I have with young guys, like that goes kind of like this. Hey, how are you doing? And we're talking about, and it's like, tell me, what do you believe about the Bible? What do you believe about God? I've never really given it much thought. Any reason? No, maybe God's real, maybe he is, but so is this something you'd like to give thought to? Because we're be willing to talk with you about it. And sometimes those conversations go well and people are like, okay, you do have positive stories, but there's so many times that people are like, I just don't feel like I have the time for it. And I remember one conversation I was talking with this one guy, and he was talking about how busy his life was, and maybe someday he'd consider whether God was real or whether the Bible is trustworthy or not. But it just wasn't something that he felt he had the time to invest at the moment. So, okay, well, so you must be really busy, right? Yeah. So he said, yeah. So what do you do? So he's a handyman, right? Yeah, it can be a busy, tough job, and so you're working 7 days a week then, aren't you? From what you're saying, no, it's only 5 days a week, but those are pretty full days, right? Yeah. Well, no, I'm on call pretty much, but there's a lot of downtime. Thinking, okay, so the illusion of busyness is swiftly drifting away, and says, okay, so what sort of things do you do? Well, it's a care home, and so there's not too much. Maybe it could be just like changing a light bulb if it goes out or something like that. I'm just so there's a lot of downtime in the room, just trying. And okay, so what do you do with the weekends? It's like, well, I go out down the local boozer, pick up chicks, is how he put it, and stuff, and just thought, okay, and then that's Saturday, Sunday, and it's mostly sleeping off the night before and stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, this is quite a large. I think it's a fair representation of what a large portion of guys in our society do. But the way I present it is like you have over 160 hours in a week. Likelihood is, let's say you slave away, you're working 60 hours, maybe 80 hours like tops. Okay, you still have a good bit of time. Well, let's say you sleep 10 hours. Okay, so you still have. You still have some free time. You still have some time. Take even initially. Like it starts, they say, journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step.
Single step, man.
Mark out an hour a week.
Yeah.
Space it out over 7 days where you can like take one question or consider one topic, take one Bible book and just start working through it, asking yourself about that. And I think that can lead to a greater hunger, a growing sense of. We can start with this one issue, the greatest question, even philosophers outside of the faith will say, who am I? That's a great question. Yeah. But who am I almost always leads to the question, well, who made us? Yeah. Who's our creator? Yeah. And when we find the answer to that, the answer to the question, who am I, falls into place.
100%, yeah. I mean, Peter, Jesus had to ask them, who the men said that I am. And then he asked them, who do you say that I am? He teaches us a principle where we are not without the influence of culture and society when it comes to us defining, who we see or who we're around. So he establishes that, who do men say that I am? Okay, now, who do you say that I am? And only one person was able to answer that question, which was Peter. And that answer to that question wasn't even from flesh and blood. It wasn't from other humans. It was an answer, given by way of revelation from the Father who was in heaven. And that moment there, Jesus was able to identify who Peter was and give Peter a new name and an identity and even a purpose and destiny in regards to his future. I find that very interesting because once again, like you're saying, we only really find true identity when we find, the true and one living God. And I feel like behind all the work that I'm talking about when it comes to identity, once again, we're seeing the same pattern. Paul says, look, imitate me as I follow Christ. Do we have men that are worthy of imitation that other men can follow? Because I believe God put a structure and an order in place on purpose when it came to the family, when it came to his church, where he's going to have stewards, representatives who are to look like him, that are to become models and examples to those that follow them. God is fully aware, Regan, of the power of influence, and he's using it for his glory in a way whereby that will benefit us as humans. And once again, I want to really reel that in, where the change we want to see, it starts with us. And if it starts with us, it means it starts with our relationship first with God, that now influences us and causes us to be an influence to others. And once again, if I want to know who I am, I've got to know who he is. and he defines who I am. Because once again, that who I am question can also lead to toxic masculinity, where you become the decider of truth for what you are and who you are. And once again, we're in an age right now, in 2023, where people are saying that, I'm no longer a male, I'm this, I'm that. We're in this gender neurality, stage where we're in now, and it just speaks to the crisis of identity. Once again now, where in maybe 50 years' time, Regan, it's going to be very difficult to even have a stance to make on masculinity, because it might not be here anymore.
There's not even a clear differentiation in some cases.
Exactly, and so when there's no clear boundaries or clear definition, and things become fluid, once again, mankind is left to be their own God that decides what is truth to themselves, which will only lead to further destruction, because there's a way that seems right to man, but it ends in destruction. So once again, the departure from truth, departure from true identity, only leads to further chaos and destruction.
Confusion, yeah.
Confusion,
so that leads to both that absent masculinity, that passivity, as well as that toxic masculinity. A couple of years ago, there was a Vogue magazine cover that featured the pop musician and actor Harry Styles. Vogue is a women's magazine generally, and there's Harry Styles on the front, and he was wearing a dress, and he was asked about this in the interview inside. He said the lines are just kind of crumbling away. When you take away, there's clothes for men and there's clothes for women. Once you remove any barriers, obviously you open up the arena in which you can play. And I think this is kind of what we're talking about to a degree. I mean, it's just one area in regard to like the clothing element, but we're just playing around with stuff that we can't play with. In the scriptures, throughout the Proverbs, I think we have some really powerful statements that are generally addressing sons. They're generally addressing some of the issues that men have, and warning against certain actions, warning against certain beliefs and behaviors. But generally those warnings it's not just, don't do that, that's bad. It's actually all rooted in who the son is, generally speaking, one of the kings. So like here in Proverbs 31, we see the words of King Lemuel, likely a nickname for Solomon. There's no record of a Lemuel who was king, so the conclusion is this is likely from Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, an oracle that his mother taught him. What are you doing, my son? What are you doing, son of my womb? What are you doing, son of my vows? Do not give your strength to women. Throughout the Proverbs, there's a discussion of adultery. There's warnings against giving into the adulterous woman. In our society, we could look at, okay, maybe some might be thinking, well, yeah, I wouldn't do that, I wouldn't do adultery, but are you on the chat apps? Are you watching porn? Are you, doing things like that you aren't honoring to God? Those things are directly related to your lacking a sense of meaning, purpose, destiny in your identity in Christ. You're doing that because you do not see the value that God has invested in either you or in the women who are around you, or women in general, or the women even in the material that you're viewing. He says, do not give your strength to women, your ways to those who destroy kings. It is not for kings. You're a king, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to take strong drink. I mean, one of the biggest issues we have in, just speaking society in London, the symptoms of the problem often play out in sex abuse of sex, whether that's in an abusive way or whether that's just in a promiscuous way, which itself is an accepted abuse form, basically, or in the abuse of substances, to dole out kind of that what's missing. Would you say that a lot of guys out there, Ayo, are trying to fill the void?
100%. God's put eternity in our hearts, so only He can fill that. 100%. I feel, once again, that promise is so powerful, because she's questioning him on his actions, and then reminds him, you are a king.
Yeah.
Identity. Once again, a description of his identity. Like, you are the son of my womb. Like, do you know where you came from? You know, do you know who you are? Like, what you're doing is not befitting. And once again, you either use who you are as a king to abuse the power that you have to do what you want to do, which will also be you acting out from you not knowing who you really are. And then there's also this need where there's something that you're craving for, that all mankind is craving for. And that depth can be satisfied by the one who created that depth alone, which is God. And therefore, you know, sin has its promises of momentary pleasures. You know, God has his promises of pleasures forevermore. You know, so I feel like the deception of sin is what it gives us, you know, for the moment, which brings us into the various addictions and the lifestyles of bondages that we do have in this day and age, because we're trying to feel something that only God can feel. And we've been wired by appetite. We've been wired by hunger and thirst. We've been wired these ways, and these ways were to be designed to wire us after Him, not after ourselves. So I think what we're seeing with the sexual abuse and substance and whatnot, all linked back to us trying to fill ourselves with something, rather than us being filled with someone, and which then rolls again back to us knowing our identity as children of God. You know, that was God's heart when He sent His Son. That was God's heart for us as sinners who are to be saved, that we might become children of God. I want to shift your identity from being slaves to sons. I want to shift your identity from being people who are bound but now can live free. I want to shift the identity from lust to being loved. You know, I want to shift the identity of feeling like you have to work to please, and I know that you already are pleased in my Son, in me. So we're seeing God, you know, in His redemptive plan, seeking these things that will satisfy us, and we, in our limited knowledge and in our prideful ways, are trying to do things, you know, our own way, which only leads to further abuse of ourselves and other people. So, yeah.
That verse that we read a minute ago, 1 Corinthians 16:13, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. I think there are four words really that we can summarize that verse with. We have awareness, be watchful. And that awareness begins first of all with who God is, and then who He's created us to be. That sets the foundation. Be watchful, be aware, not only in that positive sense of who God is and who we are, but be watchful against the onslaught against that identity, the attempts to disrupt and distort that created identity that we have. But also watchfulness against the unrighteous response when I think we see that distortion and disruption take place that could actually discredit the point that we're trying to make. That's why you rightly drew out, he says, let everything you do be done in love. So we could, there's a lot of guys out there, a lot of Christian guys who be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. And you used, I know exactly what you mean, the word in a positive sense, aggressive, and that's like pursuit. There's something that's there that needs to be harnessed, but a lot of guys will look at that sometimes when they read this passage and they go all in. And it's not in love. It's like, you know what I mean? It's not the radical pursuit of a good that is great and marvelous, and that we will stand firm in with right attitude, with right action, finding our ability in the Lord and the strength of His might. But it becomes something that's like, I'm going to force my way. So when you're dealing with that type scenario, Ayo, like when you're reminding guys of their created identity and you're seeking to deal with this in love, will it always be received in the right way or applied in the right way?
I mean, I wish it always would be. But I feel like, once again, our, your experiences, your trauma, all that stuff, your fragmented perspective, your your filtered way of seeing things will not allow you to always receive, truth at the first time, So I'm encouraged with an analogy of, we can sow seeds and over time something else will water, and God in his faithfulness will bring increase. But I feel like, truth, I don't weary myself out with the outcome of what I know I've been sent to do. I know that I'm a messenger. I know that the one who sent me is the one that's at work with whatever I, release to these men. So I abdicate myself from trying to, forcefully, or trying to
You're not responsible for other people's lack of responsibility.
Exactly, literally. So, and that brings me a greater freedom in being able to just to lay myself out for them. So I would say in most cases, if something is done in love, and once again, like I said before, the identity and us and manhood for me being defined as love, I feel like most would receive it because it's what they are really looking for, And I love that he said, let everything be done in love, So he's now bringing, he's not saying love only looks like this. He's saying the power, the motivation behind what you do will be evident in what you say and how you say and how it's received, So I feel like, once again, 1 Corinthians 13, he tells us, you can have faith to do this. You can speak in tongues of angels. You can do all these supernatural things, Regan. And you do it without love.
Yeah.
And to God, all of it is noise and nothing. So once again, we're seeing that this thing, love, has a sincerity in it. I think Paul talks about in sincerity and in truth. Like it's not just what you say. It's where did it come from? Mm-hmm. It's not just it's that source that has as much value as whatever productivity that is that you're producing before the people. So I feel in most cases, if we can aspire to be men who are loved, who do things in love, I think, generally speaking, it will be received because boys, young men, even older men, we're still in dire search and need of that thing called love, or that one called love, should I say. And in that being expressed to us, I feel like that brings the first point of change to what it is that God has designed for us.
It's through Jesus Christ that we find that redemption. It's through Jesus Christ we find that restoration that we so desperately need. Paul writes in Romans of how we are in this world that's groaning. All of creation is groaning. We're at some point going to do Bible topics on biblical womanhood as well, because there's biblical masculinity we need to speak into. There's also biblical womanhood, and these two things, there's often a conflict, and that conflict is found there from Genesis chapter 3, where it speaks very clearly that part of the consequence of mankind's fall is this constant battle, this constant war, the battle of the sexes, so to speak, where we're going against one another, we're butting heads. Men aren't treating women right, women aren't treating men right. We're not viewing each other as co-heirs of the gospel of life. We're not viewing one another as complementary parts of a whole. We're viewing one another as conflict zones, basically, and always with suspicion. But there in Romans chapter 5, there's that reminder that just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. For sin indeed was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not counted where there is no law. Yet death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those whose sinning was not like the transgression of Adam, who was a type of the one who was to come. Well, he goes on to say that now, because of one man's trespass, verse 17, death reigned through that one man, much more will those who receive the abundance of grace and the free gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ. As one trespass led to condemnation for all men, so one act of righteousness leads to justification in life for all men. For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience many will be made righteous. The law came in to increase the trespass, but where sin increased, grace abounded all the more, so that as sin reigned in death, grace also might reign through righteousness, leading to eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Yeah.
The redemption of our fallen manhood is Jesus Christ. He's the one who's come and he can restore and bring us back and repair that image that's been fractured and shattered in us. We're down to the last few minutes of the program. What would you like to share to men in particular who have been viewing this by way of encouragement and challenge?
Yeah, I mean, my last few words, I realized that there's a practical nature to men that needs to be spoken to when it comes to how we deliver a message to them. And I thought at 412 Men, we have 3 key values that we stand by, which is community, accountability, and responsibility. The community aspect comes from the teaching of the fact of it's not good for man to be alone. You were not created to be isolated. You weren't created to figure out life by yourself. You weren't created to be self-made. You were created to live in community with other men. And we believe that manhood is not something that you figure out. It's something that is initiated by other men around you. You know, accountability speaks to the fact of that, you know, we will have to give an account for everything we do, you know. So to speak, when Adam fell once again in the garden in Genesis chapter 3, you know, God said, you know, Adam, where are you? You know, and asked him various questions. You know, Adam had to give an account of the events that took place. You know, we believe that if we can be men that pursue accountability, that means not just telling stuff that we've done wrong afterwards, but also holding ourselves accountable, letting people know where we're at before the act begins. That allows us to be men that could practice integrity in a wholesome way. You know, and the last one, but not least, is responsibility. You know, before Adam was given a wife, God gave him work. You know, God called him to tend the garden, to watch it, to keep it. And I believe these 3 values are key to your manhood, where as men, if you can practice community, as men, if you can practice accountability, as men, if you can practice responsibility, we will see a wholesomeness to who you are as individuals, because now you're living in relationship with other men. Now you're living out what it means to be a man. And above all, now you are a man who's under the authority and the government of God, that allows you now to reflect his original design and intention. And those are my few words of encouragement to you.
Thank you so much, Ayo, for joining us. Guys, please check out 412 Men. The website address is there. It's great to have you on the program, Ayo. Bless you guys, and we'll see you next time for another edition of Bible Topics.